So, we're not Ethiopian Jews. We are Ethiopian Hebrews. We are more correctly Cushite Hebrews. We're Cushite Hebrews. In fact, when the line of Judah Society of His Imperial Majesty was first initiated in the West, we called ourselves Cushite Coptic Hebrews. Some of y'all may remember that. Others may have heard about it, but don't recall that as clearly as some of us who were involved at that time. So we were first known as Cushite Hebrews. We are Cushite Hebrews. We are not Ethiopian Jews. More correctly, for this modern day logistic sense of modern day way of thinking, we are Ethiopian Hebrews. We are black Hebrews. We are also called and are known as African Hebrews. Even though some of the black Hebrews reject African, we understand where they're coming from with rejecting so-called African. What we're rejecting is the origin and root of that word and its relativity to us here in the West, who still have a need of our true ethnicity, our true culture, our true legacy, our true lineage. A lot gets confused with the big A point, the big Africa point. Now, we have brothers and sisters who are on the African continent who identify themselves with us, and they call themselves African Hebrews. Some of our people have gone before to Dimona, the Ben-Ami Carter community that went over to Dimona about 20 or more years ago and have gone through many struggles and are a vibrant and growing community in the state of Jezreel. They are known as African Hebrews or Black Hebrews. That's the name they have chosen. They defend that. They agree with that. We don't have any problem with that. We know where they're coming from. We understand they're on the front lines out there in the state of Israel, and we support them because they are representing overall, and specifically they're representing our cause as the lost sheep of the house of Israel, those of us who are still in the West, we who are the Falashas of the West. We're not the Falashas of the East. We are the Falashas of the West. You need to distinguish that. Now, the Falashas of the West, they have allowed themselves to be misnomered and named Ethiopian Jews. And there's a lot with that particular point, but we just want to talk about certain basic things. And there's a couple of good articles that are up there on the internet. One in particular on Encyclopedia Egypt. Some of y'all may have seen it. It's called No Such Things as Ethiopian Jews Exist. The Bible word is not Ethiopian, the Hebrew Bible word, speaking of the Masoretic, but it's Kushim. In translation, it's Cushite. It's Kushim or it's Cushite. So let us address a couple of points about this. First of all, question: Ethiopian Jews. We've already identified ourselves. We're Ethiopian Hebrews. We are Cushite Hebrews, but Ethiopian Jews. Israelites meets Ethiopians. Before Abraham was born, before the prophet Abraham or Abram was born, people were scattered from the Tower of Babel out of the so-called Middle East region and into Africa, into Europe, deeper into Asia, and the rest of the world. Those who remained in what's known today as the Middle East or the Middle Eastern region were the Arabs, called the Arabs, and were called the Israelites. But there were other tribes. There were sub-tribes. You understand? The Medianites, the Shabians or the Sabians. You understand? The Israelites, and then there was the Judahites. Judah and Israel had divided. You understand? The tribes of Israel, the northern 10 tribes, and the southern tribe, along with Binyam and a portion of the Levites. Secondly, the Israelian or the Israelites, they meet up with the Ethiopians, the original, we say Cushite people, Kushim, and others who were some in servitude or Baria Ibd, slaves, in other words, when they were taken into bondage in Egypt. Now, it's important to understand, to go into more detail of what that bondage was. Because as we're studying the scriptures, we're studying our linguistic, our language, we're beginning to understand why all these mistranslations and these half-truths that we have received. As soon as we go into the scripture, we get into the language, we start to study deeper into history, more archaeology becomes available. We're getting a clearer picture that the bondage in Egypt was not like the Charleston Heston Exodus movie. It was not like the popular Gentile fiction that has been marketed, and basically people have been brainwashed into believing, you understand, that the Jews and the Israelites and the Bible message has totally been whitewashed. You understand? It's been whitewashed. You understand? And it goes deeper than just, a white actor, a European actor playing a part that really is for someone who is either olive skin, brown, red, blue, black skin. You understand? There's a big difference in just the superficial, but it goes deeper. So when you see these movies with whitewashed characters playing ancient Egyptians, playing Israelites, on the surface it's inaccurate. Right on the surface, and you could just assume that if it's inaccurate on the surface, so even when you compare it with the known archaeology of the time that the film was made, then that deeper below there's a lot of other inaccuracies as well. It's just basic logic to understand that. But the bondage that is spoken about in Egypt needs to be defined, or we should say redefined, as a spiritual bondage. There was a spiritual bondage that was going on, a religious bondage. You understand? And we can see the full growth of this religious spiritual bondage when we look around today and we talk about religious or spiritual issues today. It really seems as though that the ancients must have knew a lot much more than we do, because though we have a lot of toys and technology, spiritually people are really empty. You understand? They really don't understand. They're questioning whether there is a divine source or principle in creation. It's like their spiritual materialism has blinded their eyes to the life and the life force and the life giver. So that's a whole other issue. Materialism has caught them up, spiritual materialism. But when the Israelites went down into Egypt, a new king arose, according to the scripture. They came into a bondage that was defined as a spiritual bondage. Once you have somebody in bondage spiritually, you understand, if their spirit is bound, then their body follows. You understand? If they are spiritually free, you cannot really keep them in bondage. Let's understand that. In other words, the Israelites were not taken into bondage because the Egyptians beat them in the war and then grabbed them and took them, you understand, as prisoners of war. That's not how it happened. They went down for food in time of Joseph, while Joseph lived, things was well for them. A new king arose in Egypt. This is clearly what Orit Za'at says, clearly what Shemot, or the book of Exodus, outlines and says. All right? Now, when the Israelites came out of Egypt, when they exodus out of Egypt, the other so-called slaves, or those who also were in bondage, or the strangers, or what the Bible in the King James Version describes as a mixed multitude. They came out with a mixed multitude, also came out with Muse and with the Dekik Israel, the Beit Israel, and traveled with them for 40 years in the wilderness. So for about 40 years. So we have a mixed multitude. We have the Israelites, speaking of the physical blood, racial, ethnic lineage, as well as other strangers, former slaves, mixed multitude that came out with them. The Bible describes it. So when it gives a number, when we start to get certain numbers, like in the book of Numbers and other areas of the scripture, for the number of the Israelites, you have to remember that there was a lot of other people. You understand? They also came along with them. Whenever any of these individuals became prominent in our history, They are always noted as being Israelites, but then it says they were the son or daughter of such and such and such. And when you look into the genealogy and lineage, you find out that some of these people who they were descended from were not any of the 12 tribes. So they was not direct descendants, but they basically made themselves family over time with ones and ones. All right. So now here's an interesting map right here, just to understand that the blonde here, the blue eyes, you understand, northward in Europe, where you see the arrow, Europe, and these are the Aryans, the Anglo, the Saxons. So we're not Ethiopian Jews, we are Ethiopian Hebrews. We are more correctly Cushite Hebrews. We're Cushite Hebrews, in fact.